Well, hi, here we are. Week 5 is coming to a close, and I have some thoughts, some responses, some more to say to you out there regarding this week's studies and looking at outputs and incomes. I've really spent a lot of time over these last couple of days thinking more about this, pondering more on this whole topic, and I want to pick up again about outputs, outcomes, and impacts. I'm going to add a third piece there. And I want us to think about it this way. Outputs are the immediate results. When I'm reading your posts, outputs would be things like we want more people, we want better educated people, we want people to know more about the Christian church, disciples of Christ. These are outputs and those are generally that or outputs are generally the key focus of Christian education ministries. We think immediate. What do I want people to be excited and so that they'll come back. Those are outputs. Outcomes are the results that we see a little bit later. People growing into and living out their faith, spiritual maturity. We say that these are goals, but we don't adequately program for it. And in part, that's because they are outcomes. We're not going to immediately see that. And how does one measure spiritual maturity? James has said this a number of times that there's this reticence, or you've alluded to it, Matt, maybe not said that this direct way, but there's been James has alluded to a concern about measuring maturity, spiritual maturity, because just how do you measure that, and then are you being judgmental? What who is capable of making those kind of judgment calls, if you will. Now, I will say there are ways to measure that, and it's not something we see being done very often, and that it's really done in a very objective kind of way. You can look at how people interact with other people. You can see about their giving, their stewardship. These are the ways that they step up to participation, and the like. Those are ways that we're able to measure spiritual maturity or spiritual maturing. I will say, though, that needs to be done over a period of time so that you're measuring for growth. And again, you're going to see more about this in this next week and so about how we can help people move through different stages of their faith walk. Okay, so outcomes are the results that we see a bit later. They're people growing into and living out of their faith. They're growing, maturing spiritually. And again, we say it's a goal over and over again. We say that that's what we want, but we don't adequately program for it. And when we do program for it, we don't measure for it. So we don't know how effectively we're achieving these kind of outcomes. Okay. So then the other, another piece about that is that we are so caught up. We get so caught up in what's happening this Sunday or this month or this quarter or this Advent, that countdown to Christmas we're about to start on December 1st. That's what we get caught up in. That's what we focus on. So we're looking so carefully or so closely at outputs that we don't get to really think about outcomes, let alone impacts. Impacts are the long-term, far-reaching results. You could call these kingdom results in some ways. How are people making disciples? Right? Evangelism and mission. Those have been themes that we've seen on posts this week. We want people to be motivated to go out and share their faith. We want them to know how to share their faith, right? So, I mean, how many of us have in our Christian education programs have a dynamic on just how to articulate your faith, or what is it that you really believe? How are you going to share that with someone else? With whom are you going to share that? Do you see? Those would be planning for outcomes, and then the impacts. So you're going to look: are we helping people really get grounded in their faith so that they're motivated to go out and be part of changing their neighborhoods. Impacts, again, those long-term, far-reaching results. How we could ask the question, how is our Christian education ministry making a difference in or changing our neighborhood? So, outputs, outcomes, impacts. And most of what I've seen on the forums this week are really talking about methods of getting to our outputs. So we've got a little bit of output on there, right? We want more people, better educated people. We want to see different kinds of people incorporated, but then we start talking about the tools, the vehicles for doing that. So when we think about outputs and outcomes, I want to push you to go deeper, think larger. This is more than programming, or it's more than what we're offering. What we offer, those, again, these are tools, these are vehicles, these are the ways, the methods, the modes that hopefully will work for us in our setting. Um, and remember, what may be working in someone else's setting isn't necessarily going to work in our setting, if there aren't some parallels. When many years ago, when Willow Creek was really, they had grown very large. They were probably about 10, 15 years into their church plant, but they were, the biggest goingest thing in the United States pre-Saddleback. And people were flocking there to learn about what Willow Creek was doing. And I remember going there, and we bought the curriculum, and we were really excited to use that in all these different ways. And all kinds of people were really excited about using it, what they were going to do with it. And they were incorporating it into their churches, and nothing happened. Some people showed up, a lot of people didn't, maybe a little more people showed up, but they weren't getting the results of Willow Creek. And when you think about what were the results they were looking for, well, really they were thinking about outputs, that they would see more people, with the outcome that they too would have thousands of people in worship services every week. And actually, most of us were thinking about, could we just see 100 or a couple hundred, or 500 would be like mind blowing, and just on Sunday mornings, because we weren't thinking bigger into maybe my little church that only holds 125 people. We might have to have multiple services. We didn't take into account, and I own this one. I was in a small rural community with less than 2,000 people in the county that we averaged about 100 in our worship services. And here we are using materials that had been produced by a thousands and thousands and thousands of members congregation, with worship space that held more people than we had in the whole entire county. That was a suburb of Chicago. Not exactly the same thing. What was working for them and their people was not translatable to where we were and to our people. So when you're thinking about outputs and outcomes, I want you to think about how specifically are you changing people's lives, or how are you changing people's lives, and what does that mean to their life to be changed? What does a changed life look like? How do you know that their life is different or has changed? Do you see how that helps you with outcomes? If I'm teaching for this and I want this effect, I have to know what effect I'm looking for, right? So what do I mean when I say I want people's lives to be changed? What does that mean? What will that look like? What will they look like, if you will? Specifically, how would you be changing people's lives? If you could wave a magic wand, how would you be changing people's lives? And how will you measure whether or not they're changed? Those lives have changed. And then the question, how will we do this, comes into play, right? How we do, what kind of classes, what kind of studies, what kind of book groups, what will we use? What tools will we use? Now, you may notice that this isn't just about Christian education ministry, is it? I mean, it's not. We tend to think in churches. We think in silos. This is where Christian education is. This is worship. This is, I don't know, mission. And instead of seeing this as a big old ranch where the different ministries are housed, if you will, in different places, the dorms for the or cattle hands, and where the animals are and where the feed stores are kept, that all of those, it's a ranch, all of those are part of this, but not siloed and sectioned off. And in that regard, we have to, as Christian education folk, we have to be working with the worship folk and the mission folk and doing things whole church. We've got to adapt practices that are synchronized, integrative, and that we don't approach things just as Christian education, because Christian education is part of this whole that encompasses worship, right? That encompasses mission, that encompasses evangelism altogether. All right. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about that. One last piece of thinking in terms of evaluation and how do we evaluate our programs. So to evaluate our programs, let me go back there and recap for a moment. To evaluate our programs, we have to know what our outcomes, our anticipated outcomes are, to be able to look at our outputs and ask, is this leading to an outcome? And then to challenge ourselves to set outcomes that will lead to impacts far beyond our church doors, that or the doors in the places in which we meet as church. What is that looking like? Where is that? How is that? Now, evaluating our workers. Again, you have to know what your anticipated output and outcomes are, because you can't tell whether or not somebody's being effective if you don't know what exactly it is that you need to be seeing because of their ministry. Is it that you want better educated people? Well, using the standard Bible study, standard lectionary, the standard curriculum, that should give you some output results. You should be able to see it right away. But then the next question is this resource producing the kind of outcomes that we want? Are people growing in their faith and in their excitement about their faith, that they want to go out and share that with others, both through in word and in deed, by sharing their faith verbally, but also sharing their faith by being Jesus for other people, right? Not just talking about Jesus, which is so often how we think of evangelism, right? Talking about Jesus, but that there needs to be a connecting part with Jesus in there as well. And then being Jesus, if you will, that thinking missionally is where we are Jesus for others. Okay, so we need to know what we anticipate as output, and then what our projected outcomes are. And if we don't see that happening, then if we don't see output, if we don't see outcome, it's easy to blame the teacher or the curriculum. But some questions that go into play there. If you don't know what you're looking for, then you won't find it. Right? You can't find what you're not looking for. Or, yeah, okay. Or we sit back and say, well, just go and teach them material. And then if something cool's happening, like, wow, more people are coming, then we're like, wow, that's really cool. But what is it that we want? It's about being proactive, right? About being intentional, having an intentional program ministry. Imagine that. So what are your projected outcomes? how are you going to measure this? What are those mile markers? What are the outputs that you anticipate seeing to get to that outcome? So then if we're not seeing those, we can ask ourselves, what tweaks do we need to make? Or is this way of teaching, or is this material, this curriculum, this idea, this notion of having vacation Bible school, is this working? Does this produce the results that we want? If not, then we rethink that tool and how we use it, or whether or not to use it. There are reasons that people don't measure up to the expectations and needs that we have. One is we haven't been clear about our expectations or what our needs are in programming. I mean, just sitting here talking about this, my guess is some of you are going, oh my gosh, I never really thought about, being clear or intentional about what our, what our intended, intentional, what our intended outcomes are. I maybe I thought about some output, but I never thought beyond that. Um, so what are the expectations? Be clear about that, so that then you can't evaluate somebody if they don't know what they're being evaluated on. And there, as we talk about evaluations, that comes back. Wow, I'm going to feel really funny going in and evaluating somebody, because one, we feel badly that they may not be meeting up to our expectations, but we don't even know the reason for our expectations, right? We just know that there are things we expect, but we never articulated to them that to them. Usually, what we articulate is something along the lines of, "Hey, we need somebody to fill in for the adult Sunday school for the next year because Mary Moses, she's just not been up to teaching it for another 100 years, and she only had a good 100 years to go. So, would you be willing? Could you, like maybe because there isn't anybody else, step up there and be the Sunday school teacher only for a year, maybe two, but only for a year. And we already have the curriculum. It comes every quarter. If you want to use something else, that would be okay. But I've got catalogs. If you need more information, you need some help thinking about what you'd like to teach. But hey, like I said, we've got this on automatic order. It comes every quarter. It's going to be there for you. And just we Sunday school every week. Just be there on Sundays. And if you're not, if you let us know, we'll get somebody to fill in for you. Those are our expectations. Show up, teach. If you can't, we'll find somebody for you. Hey, we'll even make sure you have the curriculum there. No, nothing more than that. So is it any wonder that people don't measure up to these unspoken expectations? Because we feel like they ought to know, of course we know we're supposed to be there. Of course we know that we want more people to come. And then we feel badly when they don't come, and we don't want to be evaluated because, God forbid, I know that you see that more people aren't coming. In fact, maybe fewer people aren't coming, or are coming. Fewer people are coming because I'm not really Mary Moses and people just came for her. So please don't evaluate me. When we are intentional about the outcomes that we seek, the outcomes, the changed life. And really, that's where we're pushing in this class, right? This is about education and leader development. We're taking education to where it really needs to be, to discipling. So when we talk in terms of those ways, we have to be intentional about our outcomes and the expectation of those outcomes. And when people aren't able to deliver those outcomes, there are several reasons or potential reasons. It may not be that they're just, the only person we could grab. Now, a lot of times they are. But when people aren't able to measure up to the expectations or the needs for our outcomes, excuse me, there are generally one of 4, maybe 5 reasons. One is because they don't have the resources they need. We just have have that curriculum on order, and we put it into their hands every quarter, and we don't think in terms of whether or not that curriculum is what we need to have those particular outcomes. And I know some of you are going to say, I know, but they've been using that curriculum forever. They never want to change. They'll never change. They'll complain. You might be surprised when you start talking and you start when you're excited about the possibilities of changing lives. What will those lives look like when you start talking about the difference you can make in your neighborhood or your village, your town, your community? When you think about that and you talk about that and say, if we just kind of tweak this, and we had people as excited as you and I are, just imagine what might happen. And I don't think this curriculum is really raising that excitement. I get a sense that this curriculum, some of us have been learning these same scriptures every 3 years, because they repeat every 3 years. We've been doing this, and there's always new insight. There's always more to learn. But I'm thinking, if we added this piece, if maybe we kept this and added this little piece, or maybe just for 3 months, maybe during the summer, we could continue to have Sunday school and try this curriculum for 3 months or so, that I think will have an even a bigger impact, not only on the folks who are here, but on the people that we want to be part of helping their lives to change. So getting the right resources into leaders' hands, teachers' hands. Um, People need training. So when they're not able to meet expectations or needs, maybe because they lack resources they need, the training that they need. It could be the funding that they need. It may be because at the moment they don't have the ability. They don't have the time, the energy, the whatever to study to be able to teach. It may be that they're better at teaching the standard Bible studies rather than the uniform. I just can't get it right tonight. The uniform Bible studies, we'll call it that. The uniform Bible study. It may be that that's what they're really good at, teaching in that way, but they can't teach in a different way. They may not have the capacity to teach differently. And all of that will be part of your not meeting the expectations that you have, let alone being able to see the results that your congregation wants and needs, to changing people's lives, to having an impact on your community, on your neighborhood. So, evaluating people, remember, we want to be clear about what our outcome expectations are. What is it? Not just output. They know the output. Get people in there and teach them. Basically, that's what we've been wanting from output. We want to talk about outcome. So those of you who have capacity, or are in those roles of leading Christian education, of working in or with Christian education, of leading your congregation in a pastoral or in a leadership, a board leadership or Christian education leadership type of position, you have the opportunities or a responsibility. I'm handing you this responsibility to think in terms and to talk and have conversations with your leadership about what are our proposed outcomes, and propose some. You have the right to do that. Propose some outcomes. If they don't sit around and go, what kind of outcomes do you think we should have? You've got ideas. You know your community. You know what the needs are. Make suggestions. Or again, if you're the pastor or the chair of the board or the director or minister or head of Christian education, stand up there and be bold. Vision. Cast some vision. Here's some outcomes. then look at how your classes or your small groups or your Bible studies or your book groups, how are they filling those outcomes? And you need to have one uniform outcome as a church to start with, and then you as Christian education working along with these other parts of the ranch, right? With your other teams, the other ministries within your congregation, all of you should be meeting at least once a month to sit down and say, here's what we're about. These are the differences we're making. These are the outcomes that we're seeking. This is the impact we want to have 4 or 5 years down the line. Now, are we doing that in worship? Are we doing it in Christian education? Are we doing it in our mission ministries? How are we doing this all together? Do our leaders have the resources they need? What kind of training do they need? How are we providing them with the funding and the resources? And do we have the right people in the right seats on the right bus? Right? They may be one heck of a great prayer, but not much of a teacher. And so are they in the right place on the right bus? Um, do they have the ability? Do they have the time to be giving that? Is their life where they can do this? Are they doing it out of duty or honor or any other number of reasons, but letting other things go with that? With that training, if they're not doing the work or meeting the expectations we have, one, did we express our expectations? But is this about them needing that more training or those different resources? And if it's about training, then I have to ask the question, do they have the capacity to learn? Because if they don't have the capacity to learn what they need to know in that position, if they're on the wrong bus, they need to be in another seat in a different ministry, right? Then move them. And when it's time to move people, think in terms when you're evaluating and you realize someone is not working really where they're best suited. One of the ways to approach this, and this takes work on your part, is to say, if not here, then where? Because God has called all of us to be in some sort of ministry or mission in His church, and so if it's not in the teaching ministry, and you don't seem to have the capacity for it to become that ministry, the teaching ministry, then where is it? Where would they be better suited? And dream and venture and don't go, well, they do the least damage over there. Or, I think they could. Really ask God, ask Jesus, pray about that. Where is it you want to use them? And then figure out what kind of training do they need. What are you going to offer them when you go and say to them, I know you've been teaching this class for 10 years, but you know what? As I sit back here and I look at this, I see these gifts in you. I see this passion in you. I see. We really need you and this ministry here. And this is why. And this is what we're going to do to help you with that ministry. We need you to be as successful in that ministry as you've been in this one. And they might think, and you might be thinking, successful. I mean, they're not being successful. That's why I want them out of there. Well, they've been successful enough to be able to be in there for quite a time, right? There's some success, perhaps, at least some loyalty in that. All right. So that's a lot. This is much longer than I ever anticipated or wanted it to be. But I really did want to come back to evaluating, to making sure that as you evaluate, it's not primarily the person you're evaluating. It's also about you as congregation. What resources are you providing? What training do you provide? Training opportunities? What about the funding? And are you really doing your homework with folks and what they need and what they have? Also wanted to bring home about the need um, to have um, intentional and integrative ministries, right? That Christian education isn't a silo by itself, that you bring it all together, and for you to think about outputs, outcomes, and impacts, not just tools or modes or methods, right? All right, with that, I'm leaving you. I'm giving you back your evening, and I will look for you again in the morning, Saturday morning. This is Friday night, and I'll look forward to closing this conversation. I'm looking forward to some Sabbath time and some good work on behalf of our Lord. I'm trusting that you're going to take care of yourself in some small way. I'm trusting you to do that, and to see Jesus wherever it is that you're worshiping, no matter how tough that day may be, no matter ah, how much you may question whether or not Jesus is still in that house, whatever that may be. Just my prayers for you going into this weekend are that you will see Jesus, that you will find the time to do just one thing for yourself to get some rest. I think that's enough. All right. Take care. I'll look for you on the forum tomorrow, and I will see you again next week. Thanks. Bye bye.